Okay, so let's find out how Robbie gets on. Okay, I knew not if this claim were true or false. Indeed, at that time I knew little enough of wolves, only that by repute the wolf. The wolf was a species of wild and savage dog that stalked the countryside preying on sheep, and even sometimes it was believed on human flesh, so that whenever and wherever they were found, they were mercilessly hunted down and killed. As I stood there contemplating how strange it was that my own life had been saved by such a creature, I heard at some small distance from me in the dark of the heather the sound of whining and yelping. Within a dozen paces I came upon what I perceived as once to be a wolf pup. I was not fearful, for I could see that he was too weak to do me harm. Neither, it seemed, was he in the least fearful of me. He paid me not the slightest heed when I crouched over him, but instead licked the ground, crying piteously, as though his heart would break. I talked to him as I crouched down and gentled. "Come," I said, feeling at once an instant kinship between us. The kinship of orphans, the kinship of fugitives. This is no place for you. This is no place for either of us. I live now only because your mother died, so I shall care for you as she would. That much I owe her, that much I owe you. You are alone in this world, as am I. But if we are together, then we are not alone, are we? We shall go where we go, always together. Trust me." With some difficulty, for he was heavier than I had thought, I gathered him up and held him in my arms. Though he struggled against me and snarled and snapped, he was not strong enough to do me harm. "And I shall call you Charlie," I told him, "for you are bonny and a prince among thieves." From that day on I had always two mouths to feed, two reasons to survive, and therefore my resolve to do so was redoubled. I passed the long summer months hidden away with Charlie in a deserted croft high in the hills, living only on what I could catch or trap from the streams and hills behind me. Being summer, there were rabbits and hares enough, and trout too in the burn, and Charlie needed little encouragement to eat. The more I fed him, the more he came to trust me. Though I looked for it at first and feared it too, I saw in him no signs of the wolf's savagery. He curled his lip and bared his teeth at me, only in jest, as we played together, and play indeed we did, romping and rolling in the heather, wrestling with one another like children. Even when he bit me, he bit only gently, in affection, leaving me with raw knuckles, perhaps with no real hurt ever done to me. He grew quickly from a pup into a young wolf, and as he did so came to know me and to love me, perceiving me now as his provider and his friend, so that he would follow me wherever I went, his nose touching the back of my legs as if to remind me constantly of his presence, of his reliance upon me. In my turn, I came to look upon Charlie as my only friend in the world full of enemies. I had no other. Wolf and rebel, we were inseparably bound together by the very nature of our common plight. So it was Charlie I talked to, Charlie I confided in, and like the good friend he was, he seemed always ready and willing to listen. The summer months passed into autumn, and we were still undisturbed in our remote hideaway in the hills. But with time to brood and winter approaching, I was becoming ever more anxious about our predicament. To survive a winter in this barren place would be hard, and I feared too that even here we must surely one day be discovered and hunted down, that our good fortune, which had held for so long, could not stand much longer. I began to realize that if we were not to remain fugitives in these hills all our days, I must find some permanent home elsewhere, across the sea, in some more hospitable land, in France perhaps. Some Frenchmen had fought bravely alongside us at Culloden, so I knew that the French were sympathetic to our rebellion and might give us sanctuary. I had only once seen the ship in Edinburgh. I remembered the ships lying at anchor, so I determined to return there as soon as possible. I thought we might be able to lose ourselves in amongst the great crowds that throng the streets, but even here I knew I could scarce expect to remain unnoticed for long with Charlie at my side. Tame though he was now, and biddable too, and in many respects much like any other large dog, there could be no doubt that Charlie did indeed, by this time resemble what in fact he unmistakably was, a wolf. I knew well enough that almost no creature is more instantly recognisable than a wolf, and that none inspires more fear nor more hatred either. Discovery would mean certain death for both of us, wolf and rebel alike, a circumstance I tried to explain to Charlie as I set about the business of disguising him. I think I should never have discovered how this might be accomplished at all, had my eye not fallen one evening on a pair of discarded sheep shears hanging on the wall of the croft. I burned the rust off in the fire, sharpened the sheep shears on a stone, and set to work at once on Charlie. But Charlie made it plain that this was an indignity he deeply resented. He would growl at me and back away, refusing to stand still for me, knowing that I could not restrain him against his will, for he was by now far too strong for me. I resorted to bribery, as I so often did with Charlie. I discovered that if I coaxed him almost constantly with rabbit meat, he would, albeit unwillingly, stand and endure the sheep shears. Ooh, wonder what he's doing with them.